I'm sorry, quick here. I'm not going to read word by word. I really want to save time for the questions. The journey, I'm not going to walk you again with everything in it, but I want you to see when it was born, FDA case for quality, to what CIM had driven, how the industry all get together, and where we are today. Really happy to see here industry adoption. The CSA Computer System Assurance Draft Guidance that hopefully targeted to be released in fiscal year 2019. Mr. Vicenty will to that. And the Industry CSV Team is here. I want to make sure that everyone gets credit. These folks have worked really, really hard to come up with a recommendation to draft that guidance. Cisco, I'm going to turn it to you. If you can just give us a little bit update where the guidance is at, and we'll turn to some questions. Thank you.
So for anybody who's ever been engaged or paying attention to FDA and its guidance process and activities, it is a painful and as much of a black box as it is externally, it seems to be as much of a black box internally for us too. Process in terms of, just the amount of reviews that it needs to go through, clean cycles. There is a lot of exercise in aligning with guidance or previous guidance activities so that we are trying and making sure that there isn't conflicts with things that are already established or said. So it's an ongoing effort. We had made and responded to a set of content modifications, I think, back in April, and went back through the review activities and process here. In that cycle, I've been trying to get a updated timeline of what that means and what the next steps are. So we're in the process of getting that cleaned up and updated. This is the ones that we had originally put on our A list, which means our commitment was to get it out by the school year. Ends at the end of September in 2019. So far, I haven't heard any other plans than that. So as soon as I think I've got a better idea, I'm still working towards the fact that it'll be out in draft by this fiscal year.
Great. Thank you, Cisco. I know some of the questions, they're going to be a bit later coming out, but I would like to start out with the questions. The as the only folks that have sent me some questions, so I will read each question and I'll let you answer to it, Cisco.
Sounds good.
Question number one, if we pilot the new guidance, how should we handle the fact that we would not be following our current SOPs? An interim set of SOPs be developed.
So, and first of all, let me say I appreciate the work, at least putting some of the questions together ahead of time. It's always good to at least be a little bit more prepared when it can be. So, there's a bunch of different ways and mechanisms, and the agency does allow for a company to deviate from what is in their established processes in order to adapt, learn, implement something new from that standpoint. I think the easiest way is, and we've handled in multiple fashions, some companies will create this interim SOP or some kind of draft pilot SOP, and how we're going to test these things up to this mode. Some will just perform the testing, the scope of their SOP, the document, that's what they're doing. Here's what we're going to do, here's how we're going to do it, here's why. And then once its data's collected and they've got enough evidence, then they go back and revisit and update their SOP. Far end of the extreme, we've had some people who've engaged in interest and just said right from the onset, you know what, I'm not even going to turn this into a pilot. I'm just going to completely update our SOPs to allow for this flexibility, and they've just done it in one shot. So it depends on how comfortable your organization is, in current status. Do they already have a process or mechanism already set up for dealing with testing out in a contained format on the side and following that? Or if that's available, just document what you're doing, capture it, do. Here's where the scope of that is going to affect, and then once the evaluation is done, we'll make a decision to feed that into the full system for an update.
Now, I just want to add so thank you, Cisco, we've helped create pilot protocol in many cases where you don't really have to update your whole set of SOPs, because working on SOPs, you're going to start, from your policy all the way to your template, et cetera. So it really helps to start with a pilot, small system, specifically if you have an update or if you have a new project, start, pilot protocol that could help. Question number 2, in the pilots that are happening now, how are sponsor auditors reacting to this new way of approaching validation?
So one of the key things that the pilots and I think the principles that are encoded in the draft guidance really allow for and capture is a much more thorough or explainable critical thought process. I believe, and the few experiences that have been shared for people who have had already the change and have gone through an audit process, especially the ISO 13485 range, the experience has actually been fairly positive. Because I think a lot of auditors aren't necessarily focused on the specific way to do things. It's can you explain the rationale and the thinking went into why you chose this path. And there is a lot more of that discussion going around the risk determination, the evaluation of the activities, how you are actually leveraging and capturing the outputs from that, and why it makes sense for those systems or that effort. And most of the feedback we've heard is that auditors are quite comfortable once that discussion happens. Now, I mean, that's always going to be the case for every auditor? No, but all their mechanisms to deal with that, I think, and most systems, where it is FDAs or an external auditors, have a way to say, if you have agreement with your specific auditor, to bring that up or escalate that up if it's needed. Say, it's about you as an organization, it's about your systems. What is the confidence and level of assurance that you're getting from the work that you're doing? And, if sound and justifiable from a risk standpoint, it's really, I think, a lot of what any auditor or regulator is looking for.
Thank you. Has any comments or additional questions pertaining to that specific question?
So this is Stephen Cook with Compliance Group. I hit on a track-wise supplier quality validation aligned to the new approach, and it came up in an audit in the Australian Ministry of Health. The auditor there really actually liked the approach a lot, commented what we were doing, and felt it was an improvement.
Okay, great. Thank you, Stephen. I'm going to go to question 3. Can you clarify how the use of test automation fits into the new guidance? Kind of evidence, sorry, I'm going to move my screen a little bit, would we be expected to provide when perform validation using test automation?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we are looking to do with the guidance is really clarify distinctly that portion of the intended use. The test automation to help support, validate other efforts and activities, that's a great tool. It's what we want more companies leveraging when it's available. So, we've really tried to capture what that is a risk effort that the agency would be concerned about, and document so that the organization spending time and energy on these types of tools. These types of tools, they're just qualified. They work within your system, doesn't meet what you need to do. Perfect. there is a lot more energy and effort that you need to put into from a validation burden or documentation standpoint. Sometimes the idea of having to validate the tool that you're using to validate the process, to validate the system, it's too many degrees of activity that gets really confounded with oftentimes a very different product risk. And sometimes these systems aren't even introducing that risk to the product, which is really what we are concerned about from any regulatory standpoint. So we're trying to call out specifically, here are some set of activities and tools that you should be using. We are going to spend our energy and resource evaluating these tools. Do right for you as an organization to make sure they work for you, but that's where we're looking to spend our energy. The level of evidence that would be expected, I think we've been trying to call out from an overall principle within the guidance is to really, from a least burdensome effort, care what is necessary so that at least you as an organization knows what went on, what was done, might have been involved. And it doesn't have to be screenshots, and should not be screenshots. It does not have to be a test protocol. It could be a very simple form. It could be even better if it's captured in some format electronically that you may have access to and can quickly learn from. So this piece of the discussion, the idea of what kind of evidence is needed, we're trying to open up the flexibility as to how that is demonstrated and allow an organization to focus on the testing and the results of that, the value of that, versus trying to generate documentation to prove that they did it.
Great. And really, in other words, given the test more, no one tells us how much evidence we need. It's really the fact of the matter is testing, to ensure that your software, your infrastructure, et cetera, is really meet quality standard, not just give me papers.
Right. Let me just highlight on something on that, because it really goes back to the idea of why, from a quality system standpoint across the board, it doesn't matter if it's software, if it's product, why do you generate evidence of any testing you did? It's really to make sure that you understand what the state, so that if anything down the road ever changes, goes wrong, you need to repeat that. You know how to get back to that. It's not about proving this to a regulator. It's about you as an organization being able to leverage the work that you've done and learning from that. And you should be capturing is the information that makes that as easy as possible for you to do down the road.
Question 4, how much documentation, actually before I move forward, is there any additional questions or comments on question number 3? Please free to jump in before I start naming your names. Okay. Science compliance. How much documentation is the FDA truly expecting we produce as compared to what we produce today?
Just in same response as the previous question here, the minimum for you to be able to trace if anything goes wrong or if everything went really right and you want to do it again, well, if that was done at the moment in time that you got. And in the best methodology, I think, for doing that and enabling the speed is to try to capture that in some electronic or data-driven format. So, we're trying to make sure that that flexibility is enabled. So, really focus on the testing results, that information set that you need, and a lot less on a slew of documentation that's required from an agency standpoint. Because I don't think I think want to keep pressing as the priority.
Cisco, it's Jason. I just want to add to your answer. In addition, I think, to using some type of automation and technology, right, to better collect it and error-proof it and all that good stuff, I also think there's the risk-based approach, right? The amount of documentation commensurate with the risk involved of the application and the intended use of it. And that's another, maybe you can comment on that now or maybe later, but that's another big part of this, right? And that's where the idea of unscripted testing really comes in. Depending on the patient impact, safety, efficacy, but then also the type of software, right? Am I customizing this versus something off the shelf or configured? It's as you've already said, it's not that we're trying to test less, right? In fact, we want you to test more, and that's coming from a software vendor, right? I want you to really test the systems and make sure you find any bugs and we're able to resolve those. But what we want to do is minimize the amount of documentation and really make that commensurate with the risk and the value, right?
Right, and a fair point. The idea that the risk, and again, the risk to the patient, the product quality, that should drive the rigor of effort that you're putting in, and then that rigor of effort should drive, what information you need to capture to be able to demonstrate or get back that state if it's needed down the road.
Great. Any questions or comments from anyone, please?
Kenny, hi. This is from Monix Bio.
How are you doing?
Hi, Shana.
Good. How are you? Just a quick question in terms of the documentation on the scripted testing side that we're familiar with on our day-to-day routine. Is there any changes in terms of that type of documentation? Like, we're currently doing pre-approved protocols, step-by-step, pre-approved acceptance criteria, and so on. Is there a change to that type of documentation in terms of the more robust scripted testing?
So what we are looking to do is to, the point in time where you need that level of protocol test-by-test case, it makes sense in certain scenarios. I think the idea here is that we've used that, applied it to every scenario. Oftentimes, other methods for testing things, and as I think Jason alluded to, the ad hoc, unscripted, a lot more of the exploratory type testing can often exercise the system better than a full scripted set, the way it's created and envisioned now. With regard to when a risk or the intended use of that system, the feature and function needs a level of scripted testing to exercise it, then you might need an initial protocol and some established criteria that it's testing that it is in alignment with, but it shouldn't be the norm, and there's ways to minimize that. So, I can't state from when you're going down to a robust scripted test that all elements aren't going to be there. I do think that you could probably streamline the document of that or the capture of that a lot more from just internal company use perspective. It could be done a lot less wordy situation or format, or it could be just a straight table that makes it easy when you're going from here to the test criteria. Here's what's going on. The approval process can happen, or the actual protocol development, if there's a lot of stuff that you're reusing, can happen even all the way up into the LP level. One of the things that a lot of companies don't leverage and reference to is the idea that at that LP level, that is, in essence, a pre-established approved protocol. So actually use that as a base and just kind of customize things from there to help streamline even a robust test when it's good.
That makes sense. Thank you so much.
So, Cisco, maybe you can comment on this, minimizing screenshots, right?
Yeah, that's definitely
away from all the screenshots.
Yes, thank you. This is great. Thank you, Shana, for that question. And we've got actually enough template and example that we can provide you. Hopefully, as we meet next week, we'll provide some samples that have been exercised by other folks like Zoll and others in Medtronics, where it really streamlined the way you do your unscripted testing or your ad hoc testing, writing very large protocol and pre-approval, etc. Great. All right. Other questions before moving forward? Okay.
One more comment,
yes.
Khalid, about
yes.
Number 4. Again, happy if Cisco would like to comment on this, but what we've seen as a software vendor is a mix of some customers. It doesn't really matter what the vendor has done in terms of SDLC and their testing. They're going to redo the validation, and it's really a waste, right? You don't want to do that. You want to be robust testing anything that's customized, anything that's been extended, right? I mean, when you start getting into more of the scripted type testing, assuming you trust your vendor, right? So my point is, in terms of the low-hanging fruit, you mentioned Zoll and you mentioned Medtronic. I think the two low-hanging fruit areas of value creation for them are, A, if we trust the vendor, let's not repeat everything the vendor did. And that's where you can take some unscripted type approaches and really minimize the amount of scripted testing you may have historically been doing. The second big value was taking the risk-based approach and applying unscripted type of testing, depending, again, on the intended use, the impact to the customer safety, as well as the type of software, whether it was customized or off the shelf and so on. So again, those are the real big areas, I think, that are low-hanging fruit, saving the value. But definitely don't repeat what the software vendor's already done. If you've qualified them, you trust them, they're ISO certified, you've been in to do an audit, the SDLC, and again, if you don't have that level of trust, then that's a different story. But these are just some areas you might want to consider.
Great, Jason, appreciate it. Awesome. All right. Question 5: how long do you think it will take for the paradigm shift in the mind of auditors? This is an interesting question. I know you've heard that many times, Cisco. The auditors are expecting the current level of documentation produced today.
So I actually think that once we get something officially a little bit more public, this change is going to take, I think, into the whole system fairly quickly. I think, and I can't speak to all the external auditors because that's not like I've been going out and doing an external pool of that. But I think even from what you heard earlier, shared from an experience standpoint, the external auditors recognize and actually accept the process fairly easily, and that's been the experience for a lot of the pilot participants who've actually gone through that activity. From an internal FDA standpoint, what I think we found as we started gauging, what would be the impact resistance or what is the actual need for additional training or update that would need to be required. The idea of having a distinct separate guidance that would help them figure out what they'd be focused on and carry about from an FDA standpoint when looking at these systems made a world of difference. Most of them were always just asking, it's about time we got a little bit more clarity on what we would need to worry about. So I think it's going to catch on a lot faster. It's just a matter of exposure and more opportunities we get to expose. Whether it's external organizations who are doing it, consultants, auditors who are working in the field to constructing the concept, the faster it's going to catch on. I think it's been an area where unless you are specifically a software expert, not even just a software expert, but a manufacturing software expert, right? Somebody who is implementing these things on the line or in that IT support base, you don't know what you're looking for or expecting, and some clarity on that makes a difference. I think that's all that they've been looking looking for.
Just want to add a couple of things, and I know you will support me in definitely one of them, which the guidance, the draft guidance, is nothing outside what the regulation is or what GAM5 is saying. GAM5 has been talking about risk-based approach for over decades. So it's nothing outside of the form. So
Correct.
you Cisco.
Right. And I think that's something we've tried to highlight from the very beginning, but understood that we needed to be able to balance say with actually giving our teams, our internal staff, and maybe other people who might be leveraging some of our FDA work, at least a reference of stability. This is, and I think the idea of putting it together in a guidance really came from.
Yep. My points, I almost lost it, but I got it back. No, just lost it. Anybody else has any comments or questions?
This is James Wade from Convotech. Just sort of a follow-up question on that. We're talking about auditors within the FDA space, but was guidance produced solely within FDA, or was there a collaboration with other global health authorities as well? I mean, can we expect this same level of acceptance in parts of the world?
So, straight what we did is started and worked on it just from an FDA standpoint, right? The way right now that I think the mechanism for doing it globally is through the maybe MDRF type forums and activities, but if this process like this is painfully slow, even just internally for FDA, it's a lot more full and slower when you're trying to get a lot of other regulators on board with that.
Right.
So the activity was struck on let's get our piece together and out there, and we could take that and build that into the larger global community. I will say that we do have our MDSAP team, which is a medical device single audit program, are a kind of global harmonized audit model. Been engaged, and they haven't paid attention to what we're trying to do with the guidance, because I think it's something that helps and makes sense, and they'd like to bring to the table to that forum, which will start to hit some of the broader, global communities at that point in time.
Great.
And I just want to really highlight what Stephen had mentioned earlier, as the Australia MOH, when they audited their system, their TrackWise, and they saw that the path of they did things was totally acceptable. From my perspective, what the regulators are looking for: do you have control? Do you have a process? Are you following that process? And that's really what the important thing. But when you write something and you do something else, and that's where the issues surface. Okay, questions? Okay. The one thing I want to also mention on a couple of the implementation that some of our clients have completed, whether with our help or on their own, have been passed also by MDSAP audit. So that's really an assurance that they're really looking at your processes and how much control you have over your processes. Question: what kind of communication, training, education is the FDA planning on doing to promote new guidance? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to take a first whack at it, Cisco. This call specifically is really one of the many things that we're trying to do. Okay, is to really market this guidance. I'm not marketing compliance group here. I'm marketing or seeing. I'm marketing the guidance because I want people to please get out of jail, get out of those handcuffs, and do something else and do something easier and better. Okay, we're doing a lot of conferences, all kind of conferences with the IBT, with NEXT, with the American Medical Device Summit, spreading the word. And whenever I can catch Cisco to join me on those. It's really important to spread the word. This is from my perspective. I'll give it back to you, Cisco.
Yeah, I think things that lead to that is the idea that a lot of this is not already outside of the regulation, right? So we're going to leverage as much opportunities as we can to share the concepts, share the principles, communicate, conferences where possible, leverage other groups who are willing to take up the mantle and communicate the message, to reach out at least on spreading the news. While the guidance is going through its process, because that'll at least form things a little bit more, we're engaging through that fashion. We're engaging one-on-one or through activities like this. So if people need to get clarity from us as an agency, they can contact us and we can work with them. If they need any additional assistance in their activities, they can contact us and we'll work with them. With regard to training and a more formalized education, both externally and for our internal staff, well, we already started working on training and building some of these concepts into trainings for our internal staff. We need to wait for the guidance to go out and be published for us and start building up more formalized FDA kind of training or education modules around an established guidance. So that's going to need that milestone to be hit for us then to start developing mechanisms, things that we can list on the web that will clarify, explain the concept. And then we can work through these venues, we can be engaged, and we are working with interested to really come seek out the guide or engage with us.
Here from anyone? Comments? Cisco, I'm going to ask a question. So
yep.
I'm a medical device firm, and I heard about your guidance, but I need to do it,
yep.
and I still do it. Who can back me up? Who can support me to this?
Sure.
Because I'm working with this consulting company, and I really don't trust them. I'm not going to say their name. It starts with a CG. But can I still go ahead and do this?
That's a fair question, and I think we've had that happen more than once, a couple of throughout the process. And oftentimes, what we've found is not even, lack of trust. It's sometimes just an internal conflict between an established system or experience base with regulators and a hesitancy to push and move in this direction. When those situations arise, what we've offered is just come engage with us. And in some cases, we've even put together if we need to, a review of what they're proposing to change to and acknowledgement letter from the FDA that says, yes, this is acceptable. Go forth and do. If there's any questions that anybody comes up with later, if you have any, issue with an FDA inspection or audit, please reference them to this person so that we can actually work in the situation. But on a one-off basis as well, the guide is developed.
Thank you. So anyone else, please? Please, and we don't have to stick to those 7 questions, right? Please jump in. Feel free. This is your opportunity.
There are a couple of questions from Convatec. First question is, initially the guidance itself as a non-product CSV guidance, but now the name has been changed to include manufacturing systems. Could you take us through the journey of the change and also highlight which systems are in the scope of latest guidance?
Actually, so the evolution of that. So internally, from an FDA standpoint, we understood what non-product CSV meant. Whenever we talked about that, we knew that basically covered everything else that was not software in a medical device or software in a medical device. There's guidances for that. The general principles of software validation guidance is available to that. This was look at target, I think it was Section 6 of the General Principles of Software Validation Guidance, which is just very short, 3/4 of a page long on everything else that is software related to development, operations, manufacturing, quality systems of medical device manufacturers. So the original guidance was kind of put together with that naming convention. We want to cover non-product CSV, which we thought was very clear. Well, we went through this drafting and feedback process. We especially got up through our, review policy people that was not a clear phrase or terminology, so modified it to clear and specific about where it is referencing, right? It is manufacturing, operations, quality systems, which are all those portions outside of software in a medical device, software as a medical device that gets touched on. But I think it also allows us to just even push out of bounds things that are maybe just business operations, that are sometimes being rolled in with the same level of rigor and activity that is done for the degree of automation for a system dispositioning product quality or something at the end of the day. So the evolution really was one about trying to provide more clarity about what we are focused on and what it entails. It's a little bit more descriptive with the terminology than just non-product CSV. And like that changeover worked, at least from an internal understanding standpoint and external. I think if it does become a situation where it's still not clear, once the guidance goes on to draft and we get public comments, I would appreciate hearing and getting that feedback so that we can make adjustments.
Yeah, for clarification, when we non-product CSV or the title and the draft now, again, this is for any type of software that actually in a medical device, it's not in the product, right? Or it's not an app that's used as a medical device. This is everything else, right? It's LIMS, it's CAPA, it's MES, it's ERP, it's Excel sheets, it's everything else. That's what we're talking about is in scope. It's software that's used in your manufacturing equipment, right? Test equipment. It's just not the software that's actually in a diabetes pump or a pacemaker or things of that nature.
Right. I think the point that Jason's also making there, as you saw in the title, they were really trying to focus it on, because really the reg that applies here is the 82070I reg. That's covering just these portions, right? And there's a lot of stuff and software and tools that are really outside of that bound. So it's actually helped narrow the scope. We got something for, like I said, software as a medical device, got some software in the device. Nothing for the other piece that we care about, which is manufacturing and quality systems. If software doesn't fall within the range of these, I think clarity from our auditor standpoint, for organization standpoint, it's not within scope of what we should be looking at.
A question, comments?
Little question from Convatec. I think it's already been answered, but since I received it, I'm going to ask it. Performing a global data integrity initiative at our various manufacturing sites, can computerized manufacturing systems take advantage of this guidance?
So the principles that are available here apply to the work that's being done there. There's no reason for it not to apply. There's no detriment to it applying. I know that from a data integrity activity standpoint, and there's a guidance that's been issued, there are certain elements that you probably need just a little bit more rigor or demonstration around, and I think it's called out heavily in that piece. But all of the principles, all of the methodologies that are done here and how to capture it should apply and can be leveraged for that.
Good. Thank you.
To question number 7 from MedBase, is the new guidance changing with respect to cost systems and company's current responsibility to verify fitness for use?
Yeah, well, I think what we are looking to do here, especially for the cost system, is, again, clarify a lot of what the expectation is, clarify the rationale or thinking that we would want to see going into the evaluation of the system and the work that's going to be done. And most importantly, something that I think a lot of organizations have been taking advantage of is take a lot of credit for a lot of the work that you do ahead of time to decide what system you're going to engage in and invest in, right? That's not often a willy-nilly effort. You go through, there's evaluation of the systems or what's on the market. There's, you know, an analysis of what it does to meet the you're looking for. There's vendor reviews. There go with that, right? What's the level of trust and engagement? There's all of that is part of your assurance effort. Take for all of that. When this is decided on, then go back and minimize the amount of redundant effort that you would take normally. And on the product touching implementations that you're doing in your specific area, what goes back to that intended use, it doesn't mean you have to verify everything, every feature, every function, every capability that's in there.
And that goes back to what Jason had talked about as well. So,
yeah, and even with that, and as Jason was alluding to, it's foundationally, and I referenced John Murray's language here when we were working on this. Take credit for the good work you're doing. That I think has been missing for a long time.
Great. Okay. It's really open for everyone. It's been open for everyone, so please jump in and ask. You've got minutes with Cisco Vincenty. And Cisco, by the way, sorry for misspelling your last name. Question.
My question for the group on the phone is, based on what you've heard from Cisco, I mean, what other barriers do you see? Again, we're starting to see a lot of companies leveraging these risk-based approaches and significant value creation. It's looking fruit, right? And it's not like there's anything outside of the regs that are being advocated. I'm curious, what are the other barriers? I mean, let us know, because I mean, it's been great working with Cisco, and he'll take it back and try to remove the barrier if it makes sense. Silence to mean that everybody on the line is going to go start using these recommendations tomorrow. If you're ready.
So unless they all left us.
Could I ask a quick question on your opinion on use requirements? They've always bothered me, frankly, because by the time a system usually reaches the validation department, it's already been selected. And in theory, the user requirement is used to define the needs, the business, solicit proposals for a system, and we typically reverse engineer them out of functional requirements to check a box and say we have them for the potential audit.
To a lot of the user requirement, even that state in terms of how we look at things, right? That's something I think that makes a lot more sense when you're developing the software yourself. But what you're doing at the other end is really that piece. I think you highlighted it, is you're just trying to understand the business requirements that you're looking to fulfill. Go back and reinventing kind of that effort and activity, not a huge value add, right? There's not always going to be the need for that. So I think we specifically, even mentioned the need for user requirements, I think, in guidance here. So it is, even when you're selecting the system, there's a process you go through to determine suitability or what you need to have the system achieve. That's really all you need to start with. And then there'll be the work that it gets done to make sure you're selecting the right one that'll meet those needs, at least the majority of them, especially if it's an off-the-shelf one. What's different that might not be built by the system, and then whatever to do to make sure that when you install it, it works as you expected it to operate.
And so where I've been going with my systems is just to eliminate the UR, the FS, and go with system requirements. I really care whether it's an IQOQ or a PQ as long as I have a test case. So I end up with a 2-column trace matrix. What's the requirement? What's the test case?
That's exceedingly well done and very easy to use.
You, Stephen.
Hey.
Everyone else, please come up with ideas if we can do it or not. I mean, there's really a good opportunity for everyone to ask those questions, please. Extreme.
I have a question. This is Chris Sexton from WL Gore. It's like there's.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So Kristen from WL Gore. Seems like there's a lot of emphasis on safety and the test cases and scripting done based on that. Is for related to product quality, are we still differentiating a system that directly impacts quality or a certain process output versus a system that doesn't, or are those on the same level because they don't directly impact patients? They're not a part of a medical device?
Yeah, we are actually differentiating things a little bit, and what we're looking to, first of all, is really avoid confounding what is happening from a product quality standpoint, which is really the piece that's touching the patient, right? This is what we are concerned about. Trying to couple that from what exactly is the system contributing to that product as a whole, and then the real discussion is what's the risk of the system not operating, intended to deliver the consistency for that product piece down at the end. What we've seen a lot is oftentimes people confounding the process or the product quality or the product risk or the process risk with the system. And sometimes that system is far removed from it and it's not the same level of risk intent. We are trying to make a distinction. That oftentimes doesn't have to be on a process, function by function, system by system basis. It could be done, on a general kind of platform activity basis based in a larger SOP. It's one of the goals that we've had, 'cause that's what's been driving a lot of what got us to the state with, non-product validation activities. That thinking plus, I think, lack of clarity on our end, which is, our issue to own. We were trying to fix that. Hope that clarifies. And I think the best example I can think of at this moment in time for this situation is even in a recent discussion where, one of the people who were very interested in applying the methodology and approach ran into a situation where they're implementing a system that houses their items online. Well, obviously, the question, the person was, if the IFU is not available, it's going to die. That's, a really far extreme connection to that standpoint. And there's already, from a risk assessment, a product evaluation that says, what happens if there is no clear instructions? What are the mitigations around that? Mitigations already implemented. The system does not contribute to what the experience is if the IFU isn't available. The risk is, what is the likely event that if the system is down, there's a mitigation for that, so that's not even part of the consideration. It's the system referenced the wrong IFU, and really the risk that you're trying to evaluate, and that's a different evaluation than the one that you use for mitigation if the product's IFU is not available.
Thank you.
Wait, Cisco, I've just displayed this quote from one of our CSV industry partner, Frank from Zoll, and I hope you've been reading it. I think it's really refreshing, and it's kind of confirming to what we've been discussing with Cisco here and the responses to the questions. So I hope that also helps reassure that what we're doing guidance, whether the guidance is issued or not, things should have been doing for a very long time. Unfortunately, we have not, and this is our opportunity as an industry to just focus on the high risk project, high risk systems, and not just drown in paper and documentation. A question before we end. I believe we have no minutes left.
Hi, question. This is Becky from MedPace.
Sure.
So a lot of this talk has been about taking a risk-based approach to the testing and reducing the amount of documentation in favor of spending more time on testing. But what about the amount of time we're spending on documentation that's not the testing? So validation plans and 3 or 4 levels of requirements and corresponding verification and trace matrices and validation summary reports. We find that we're spending a lot of time on those things. And let's clarify, this is, I am talking about custom-built systems, so systems that MedPace is building bespoke. So we just find that we're spending a lot of time on that surrounding documentation as well. So is there going to be any guidance on reducing that as well?
I think the guidance overall outlines the opportunity to leverage different processes, different activities, and what the level of guidance that can be, the level of document that would be required for that. When custom building a system, I think that's probably going to have a little bit more rigor that you're going to put behind it, but a lot of the ideas and principles on how to streamline what gets documented is probably applicable. You're still going to need a little bit more probably rigor or demonstrative if you're building these things yourselves, but nothing we've outlined is not applicable. And it might be a combination of some of the activities, some of the examples that come out of it that you can leverage and use to help really streamline that documentation effort. It shouldn't be where you're spending a lot of your time.
Cisco, I'll just add, I think when you're doing bespoke custom systems, it's hard to get away from some of that, but I think that's where the idea of automation and ALM systems and automating and capturing the requirements, the linkage to do all the test cases, the reuse you can get around the test cases, the automated formatting of the test reports. That's where I think some of the automation comes in when you're talking about heavily customized systems. I I mean, using unscripted testing, if it's a medium to lower risk type feature, maybe some of this will help. But yeah, when it's customized, it's only so much I think you can do.
I think it takes a little bit more and a little effort up front to ensure you're able to walk when tracing the requirements that you're building to, and what the expectation is and what the risk of that feature function not working is. What's in here is applicable.
I come back to even in a custom system, you write one set of requirements in enough detail when you're building it to build out that system, define what it needs to do. You don't need to parse those requirements up between your SFS, CDS. Just one set of requirements, identify the potential impact to patient or product, and test accordingly.
I would echo that.
And again, there's nothing I think prevent anybody from doing any of that, right? That's certainly how you want to define that. So I think that's a great recommendation.
It's AMP legacy that we're all still in. In absence of guidance years ago, everybody jumped on AMP.
Yep. Very good.
This is Benjamin from Jewel. May I ask one last question before we are out of time, I guess? The question is that we are trying to develop a system to collect data from the equipment that produce our final products. And this information collection system doesn't impact the quality of the product in whatever way. So my question is, how do we quantify what kind of validation we need this collection system?
That's this is a situation where we probably want to maybe a discussion more often. I think I'm going to need a little bit more detail about the application and what's going on there.
Okay. Thank you.
We'll definitely follow up with you on that, and hopefully another opportunity. We're 5 minutes over time. Cisco, thank you so much for making this meeting. I hope we've answered enough questions. We will have some other opportunity, hopefully in the future, so we can have additional questions. I know many questions will come up. The opportunity for you when the guidance is released to the public to actually make your comments and add to it. I think my message, and I'll let Cisco reiterate, jump in and progressive somewhat. Don't rely on the 20 plus years of doing things.